World Financial Group offers entrepreneurs from all backgrounds the opportunity to start their own business on a level playing field. Dr. Yana Woodhouse, receiving the WCM Wall Street Pioneer Award by the United Black Wall Street of America, Inc., is one of those entrepreneurs.
I see WFG and TFA as a place where African Americans with an entrepreneurial mindset can flourish. And the bonus, we help families and serve the communities across the country.
To learn more about us, go to worldfinancialgroup.com.
We are the sons and daughters of the soul. We are resilient and forever forward-thinking. We ask for nothing else than the opportunity to live and to create the lives that we were meant to live. We want nothing but an equal chance at options and possibilities. The same possibilities and options to live out our potential as our fellow man. We want to be heard, understood, and expressive in our reality. We are the future. We are the creative. We are here.
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.
Good afternoon. It's Tony Rogers, your host for Urbanology, The Art of War. I hope all is well. We are really in the summer. I'm not sure where you are viewing this from, but if you're in New York City, you're in our first, I think, heat wave of this year. But I don't mind. I'm a Juneteenth baby, born on June the 19th, and I'd rather for it to be 90 than 9. But again, Tony Rogers here, your host for Urbanology, The Art of War. And I have two guests for today. Both have very interesting books that I would like for you to hear a little bit about. My first guest will be Dr. William Darity, who is a professor at Duke University of public policy and African American studies. But he and a colleague, Christine Mullen, have put together a book which is, I suppose, the one of the major pieces of work that can allow for anyone to understand this issue of reparations and why it's something that, even though there's a debate, as they often say, all of the facts are there, all of the history is there, all of the research is in this particular book, and in the wake of Juneteenth, I think it's an interesting conversation to have, and one to read too, in case there's ever a debate that you may find yourself in, no matter what your line of work, family or business, as to it shouldn't. I think justification may not be the best word, but the reason why reparations should be on the table and focused on. My second guest is a good friend for many, many years. She's the first Black female to own her own brewing company and has been doing a lot of work in that area as relates to not only the beer, the Harlem beers and the like, but the health components of the growing of it. And she has a cookbook that is due out soon about how to infuse different types of beer into food. So that'll be on the second half of the show. So we have two authors, and theoretically we have two authors with cookbooks because my first guest from from here to equality is kind of a cookbook as to what's necessary and what the reasons we should be able to put together the dish of reparations based on what has happened in the last 400 some odd years. So please welcome my first guest, Dr. William Darity. Dr. Darity, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on Urbanology.
Well, it's a pleasure, sir. I missed your talk when you were in Harlem on Juneteenth. I understand that it went extremely well, but I thought that it was important for me and for others to kind of get an understanding of your research, what you have come to see as uh, a case study. I guess that's the best way of saying it, as to the reasons why in the 21st century we should be able to receive some sort of reparations for the things that we, being African Americans, of the things that have taken place in the last 400 years.
So, in our book, From Here to Equality: Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, Kirsten Mullen and I have given specific focus to the racial wealth gap in the United States. The racial wealth gap, from our perspective, is the best economic indicator of the cumulative intergenerational effects of white supremacy on Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States, who are living today. And based upon the most recent data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, the average white household has $1.15 million in net worth than the average Black household. And when we're talking about net worth or wealth, we are not talking about income, which is primarily driven by an individual's earnings. We're talking about the net value of their personal property, the difference between their assets and their debts, or the difference between what they own and what they owe. So if you take that $1.15 million figure per household and try to translate it into a per person differential, we're talking about a gap of $400,000 per Black and white American. And if we were to close that gap directly, it would require an expenditure of $16 trillion. And so that's the foundation for reparations from our perspective. That's the foundation for the amount that is due as a consequence of this debt that has been outstanding for more than 55 years.
Well, again, I talk to people much younger than I to try to stay current as to the thinking of I guess this new generation that's coming upon us. And when I talked with my daughter about your book, who is very familiar with all of the things that we've talked about and the reasons for it and the justifications that's necessary in order to deal with that. But her concern is, but look at what's happening in this country now. Look at the large number of people who, let's say, are supporting the "let's make America great again" type philosophy. How and they're not looking at giving money to any entity that does not fall in line with that concept, what can be done? What are the pathways of trying to turn that tide of racism, which is the foundation of much of what you were talking about?
Yeah, so running in parallel with the intensification of what we might refer to as a backlash effect against Black American uh, advancement uh, is an increasing support for reparations. If we go back to the year 2000, a survey that was conducted by Michael Dawson and Ravana Popoff at the University of Chicago found that about 4% of white Americans endorsed monetary payments as reparations for Black Americans. That's four, F-O-U-R. And at the same time, approximately 64% of Black Americans endorsed monetary payments as reparations for Black Americans. And but if we look at data from January 2023 from a survey that was conducted by a team of researchers at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, the white proportion had increased to 28, and the Black proportion had increased to closer to 75. So there's been a significant increase in support for reparations across both Black and white Americans. This has occurred at the same time that you've had the consolidation of the MAGA movement. So as we know, we're in a deeply divided country, and the question is, who can persuade there's 30% who are in favor among white Americans. There's another 30% that I think are the core of the MAGA movement. So the question becomes, what is the possibility of persuading that intermediate 40% to go in the right direction in terms of the moral obligations of this country?
Well, I think it's more of a strategy that your book has helped, but what your research has shown is why the argument really shouldn't be an argument. However, that 30% that believe that the election was rigged and that there is some power structure beyond what we understand to be true that's in place, the strategy to create some sort of law or some sort of, which would have to be some sort of a federal component of allocation and making it something that people will abide by. How do we begin to try to get the 30? What's in your mindset that let's say the negative 30, for the lack of a better, there's a positive 30 and a negative 30. How do we approach that negative 30 with the truth? They're the ones who, I mean, when you talk about Klan, they don't wear sheets anymore. And there's some psychological things involved, which you cover, that may, be an answer. But I'd like your thoughts on that.
So frankly, I don't believe that the 30% that is most resistant are going to change their point of view. I doubt if there's much of anything that could be said to them to change their perspective. So the question again is, who can be most convincing with that intermediate group of 40% who are at the moment potentially non-committal about the issue? Mm-hmm. And so I would not argue that we should invest any time in trying to convince the 30% who are the MAGA heads. And I think that we should invest our time in trying to convince the remaining 40% to move in the direction of strongly supporting reparations for Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States.
Well, one of the things which is interesting today is primary in New York, you know, and and we're going into an election in November, which sometimes I don't even listen to the news, or because the things that are being done is frightening, as it relates to. I would think it's safe to say that there are people who would like for things to go back to the way they were when we were in bondage. And if those people are put into a position of the leadership of the government, then we might have another civil war. I mean, that's some of the things that is hard to digest. And with the work that you've done, it must even be more daunting because you have all of this fact, you have all of this information, and you kind of know what was done.
Well, you mentioned before we went on the air, you mentioned the promise of 40 acres that was made to the freedmen. And this was a promise that was made as a form of restitution for their years of bondage at the end of the Civil War. And it's a promise that was not kept. But it's interesting to note that had that promise been kept, it would have been important for either the Union troops to stay in the South or to arm the freedmen directly, because there was going to be a violent backlash against their capacity to become property owners
Mm-hmm.
in a significant way. And so I think that there's the same kind of prospect in the present moment that if a federal reparations program was adopted, it would be essential for the national government to be prepared to address those Americans who would violently respond to this dramatic policy change in our country. I'd also like to add that I think when you're talking about these kinds of attitudes that have persisted, these are attitudes that are closely connected to the spirit of the Confederacy. If we go and look at the invasion of the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, the invaders were carrying a host of Confederate regalia with them into the Capitol. As somebody pointed out, it was the first time, to the best of their knowledge, that the Confederate flag was waved in the United States Capitol. So I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that the country has never truly deconfederatized, not in the way in which we might argue that Germany has attempted to denazify. And without deconfederatization, then we enable the myths of the lost cause, the false stories about the nature of slavery, the false stories about the Reconstruction legislatures. We allow all of those things to persist, and that creates a bulwark against the adoption of reparations in the United States.
Well, again, these conversations and this conversation in itself is historic in the sense that if we're still around this world, if we haven't blown it up, people will look back at this conversation, because what you're saying is that in order for this to ever work, there has to first be an acknowledgement. And there's a lot of denial. There's a lot of, and then not only denial, there's a lot of, I don't care. I don't care. There's a lot of mental and psychological issues, which has always fueled these types of conversations, because I think that the concept, and I forgot exactly who said this. I think it might have been Johnson, is that if you can allow for the poor white to feel somewhat more superior, you can take whatever you want from them as long as you keep them aware that they are better than anybody else. And that has been used, as you know, it's in your book for some period of time. I think we have to appeal to the fact that in order to allow for, and this may sound more of a dream, or but in order for us to heal ourselves, black or white, if there is some sort of way to create uh, a relationship and a feeling of the releasing of the guilt, and also we talk about crime, we talk about all of these things. If this reparation component would go through, it would improve our country to everybody would be able to benefit. And those are the things, I guess, the arguments, to try to get that number a little higher as it relates to, it's not just giving black folk payback for what they've done, is bringing the country back into a position where it can be helped.
Well, I think it would bring the country back, or for the first time, into a position where there was a consistency between the morals that the country professes and its actual behavior. But I think we have to be realistic that to do this would not necessarily be beneficial for white Americans, most white Americans, not even low-income white Americans. The way we could design a reparations program, though, could be effective in preventing us from causing any kind of new damage to the position that's held by white Americans. But it's not obvious to me at all that they will gain from elimination of the racial wealth gap, for example.
I guess again, it's probably the way I think, but let's look at history and how, with really nothing, African Americans in particular have contributed to the well-being of this country, whether it's through slavery, whether it's through inventions, whether it's through culture, whether it's through all of these particular things. If for some reason, and how many $1 trillion are we talking about?
To eliminate the racial wealth gap, 16 trillion at least.
And if we were able to do that, I believe, and of course it's easy for me to say because I'm an African American, but I believe that those who have the power to develop business, those who have the economic opportunity to develop their minds and their skills and the things that have taken place, I think that would improve everyone. That's a hard, thing for some to swallow.
Yeah, no, it's quite possible that would be the case, particularly since you would be unleashing
that creativity
at a level that had never been
before.
Released before. On the other hand, from the perspective of many white Americans, I suspect they would view black Americans as being in a far more competitive position vis-a-vis them.
Yes.
And they might perceive that to be disadvantageous to them. So this is a tricky one to navigate.
And one of the things that I suppose we have to look at is the ramifications of what this means throughout the world, because there are two things that seem to be happening also. Germany, France, and many of the European countries are themselves going far right. They're talking the same thing as the mega people are talking about. And at the same time, African countries like Senegal and many others have young leaders who are beginning to throw off this oppressive strangle that the European countries who were colonizers have had. It seems to me, and I know that you are involved in teaching African and African American studies. I don't always like the term African American. I always like the term an African that was born in America. Nevertheless, this may be a way, unfortunately, sometimes you have to have a negative to get a positive, of creating a way that the diaspora may be awakened. Because, as you know, the resources and all of the things that are necessary to make this world, especially the new world with the different types of metals and the like coming from Africa, that may be the only power base that can kind of become part of the whole negotiation pattern.
Yeah, in the 1970s, in particular, there was a substantial amount of support that Black Americans gave to the anti-apartheid effort in South Africa. I would be thrilled if there was reciprocity in the form of the new wave of African leaders taking the position that they supported reparations for Black Americans so intensively that they refused to allow American corporations and the American military to set up operations on the continent. It would be terrific if they would take that advocacy role in support of our efforts in a way in which we took on an advocacy role in terms of trying to end apartheid in Southern Africa.
Those are some of the things that I have been, and a number of people through different organizations here, the tourism board or what have you, as far as beginning to develop a closer relationship. The whole Pan-Africanism is taken on a new way of focus, because let's just say, and I really have a couple of more minutes, this conversation could go on forever, but let's just say that Trump wins. There's always a yin and yang in everything. And I believe that when the objective conditions become severe, that creates either you come together as a group or you perish as individuals. Those are the consequences that these things bring about. Same with the African countries who are beginning to do or talk about what Gaddafi, even though he's been made to be a villain, but I think the reason why he was assassinated is because he wanted to create something similar to the euro. And with all of the different resources that the African countries have, if they can begin to relive that concept and create that economic focus, wouldn't it be interesting as to how things happen in cycles? Because if Africa would come together and create this euro or this African natural resources to create that, it would be a tremendous burden for European or American countries to not listen to those who are in America that have identified themselves as African.
So it sounds like you're talking about trying to fulfill the dream of the Organization of African Unity to actually create the equivalent of a United States of Africa. And I will believe it when I see it, but it certainly would alter the fabric of the world.
Well, the reason why I bring it up, and we have a couple more minutes, the reason why I bring it up is that that's the same thing we're talking about as far as reparations. I believe it when I see it. However, in my life, whether as as a philosopher, as a martial artist, or what have you, one of the things that I understand is that there needs to be a reason for people to move. And there is no, if there's no reason for people to move, they won't move. And for what we're talking about to come true, I don't think that in my view, and I hope that I'm wrong, but in my view, it will entail refocusing on this whole African or African diaspora, the awakening of it. Because without the awakening of it and the unification in some kind of way of the countries, and there are young leaders in Senegal and many others who are talking that same thing, is just that we have to be able to talk. That's why Soul City is so important, because this conversation goes to Africa. People will hear this conversation in Africa, and we have to understand those things. But I don't want to. I want to get back into the last couple of minutes of the book, where people can get it, and where do you want to go to that? Because, but that's what the book stimulates. After reading it, this conversation.
I do want to interject one thing, though. I think it's really important that across the diaspora there is a recognition and acceptance of the specificity of each community's claim with respect to the relevant national government. So the Black American community in the United States, whose ancestors were enslaved here, have a claim specifically on the United States government. The Congolese have a claim specifically on Belgium. The citizens of Jamaica, Trinidad, Antigua all have a claim on the UK. And I think it's important that in the process of moving in the direction of talking about unity across peoples of African descent, that we make sure that we treat with integrity the specific claims that each of the communities have. And if that were something that was done, then I think we would be on an excellent path towards achieving reparations across the diaspora, recognizing that each community has a claim on a specific perpetrator.
Well, again, one of the wonderful things about this conversation, what I would suggest for people, From Here to Equality, is the book, again, with Dr. Darity and Kristen Muller. These are the conversations that you're beginning to develop from your work, and hopefully more people will read it and begin to understand, at least from our perspective, what makes sense, and tell the viewers how they might be able to purchase your book.
So they can easily purchase the book directly from our publisher, the University of North Carolina Press. They always stand ready to provide copies of the books for anybody who would like to purchase it. It can be purchased from your local independent bookstore. If they don't have it in stock, they can certainly order it. Or you can go to the big box like Amazon and order the book. But the book is From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. And it's now in its second edition, which was published in 2022.
Is there a website or any way that people might be able to go into at this particular point?
Yes, the University of North Carolina Press has a website that's devoted specifically to that book, as they have for all of their books. But if you put From Here to Equality in a Google search, I think the first thing that will come up is the University of North Carolina Press's website.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for stimulating me at any rate as relates to the book, as far as and it's timely because we're going into an election, and wow, I can tell you one thing for sure, as as you say, you'll believe it when you see it. If we don't do the right thing, it probably will be a fairy tale rather than something of fiction. So at least we have a guide. And thank you so much for you and Christian Mullen for the research that you've done. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Surely. Thank you. And there's a lot, but again, from here to equality, reparations for Black Americans in the 21st century. Uh, Interesting book, one that I believe is timely, and it also talks about our need to begin to look at the diaspora as a whole in order to get any of this done. My next guest is a young lady who I've admired for many years. She's the first Black woman who uh, owned a brewery. She has been able to market her brew, throughout the United States. I don't know. I have to ask her whether she's going overseas with that. We might need to put that in Africa. That's another conversation. But there's a cookbook that's coming out dealing with how foods can be enhanced by beer. So I would like to introduce my next guest, Celeste Beatty, to talk about um, her new book and what she's done to be able to be in a position to write this book, the research and stuff that allowed you to be the first woman to have your own brewery. How are you doing, Celeste?
I'm doing great. I mean, after hearing Dr. Darity, I was just so inspired by his message and the book and the timing, as you said. So I can talk about the beer and cooking, but he just has me so excited about the work he's doing with reparations. I'm just, I want to cook up some of that here. So I thank you so much, Tony, for having me, and thank you for allowing me to hear the previous interview. It was just awesome.
Well, again, when we talk about reparations, that's important, but a little further down the line. But supporting people like yourself who is creating business opportunities, creating a way to take advantage of what we have, what we've inherited, the things that you've talked to me about. I'm sure when we talk about slavery, there's a yin and yang in everything. I'm sure that the plants and the herbs that you showed me in Harlem obviously were popular in the South. Tell us about how you got into this business, Celeste.
Well, I grew up in the South. I'm actually right now in the South. I'm in the hometown of Buck Leonard, one of the greatest Negro League baseball players in the history of baseball, and Thelonious Monk, godfather of bebop. So, and we have these amazing stories throughout the world and definitely throughout the South. So my roots are here. I grew up on my grandparents' tobacco farm in Wilmington, learning about farm to table, that term that they use. And you're like, okay, I know about that. They planted the food, we picked it, and my grandma cooked it. So that's farm to table. So these are long-standing traditions that we've had, but I fell in love with cooking and being in the kitchen with my grandma, my aunts. This is our 50th family reunion coming up here in North Carolina. So all that great food and conversation will take place in a few weeks. So that was just part of my roots, being around great food and beer and wine and some moonshine. But anyway, it was just a rich environment. And as you just pointed out in your previous conversation, we have so much talent. We have innovators, we have inventors. It's just, I can walk outside this door, whether I'm in Harlem on 125th Street or right here on Tarboro Street, and just run into this richness, this history. But like you said, not to get into it because I'm riled up about that last conversation, we just haven't had the resources to really leverage so much of that talent. And I'm very thankful to have been in the kitchen and learning and tasting and smelling and being inspired from our roots to start making beer. Beer is cooking. The vat's behind me. You fill it up with water. You add your barley. You add your hops. You add your spices, whether it's cumin, coriander, all that stuff. It's like making a soup. I just fell in love with that because it reminded me so much of just being in the kitchen or near the kitchen right here in North Carolina, and started making small batches in my apartment across from Marcus Garvey Park. What more inspiration do I need as an entrepreneur than that? But anyway, I could go on and on. I'm going to let you ask the question.
But tell us about your beer business. You have a brewing company. Where can someone get your beer? How do you distribute it? Is that something that also I was saying international at this point, or how do those things go?
Yeah.
What's that about?
So I started home brewing, as I mentioned, right on 123rd Street, making small batches. A lot of brewers and people that have passions, they start with small batches. They let people taste it. Our first account was Sylvia's Restaurant. So after being able to take those small batches, I found a place where I could actually do large-scale production, which was in upstate New York. Another history, Solomon Northup, 12 Years a Slave, was from the town where I started brewing. Anyway, there's all this amazing history. So from there, you're really just letting people taste it, whether it's Sylvia's, as I mentioned, or Spoon Bread, or Melba's, and all those amazing restaurants that gave me a chance. And then I love cooking with beer, so we were able to do some pairings when we launched at the Studio Museum on June 19th, 2001.
I
Norma
remember.
Darden, beer battered catfish fingers. So that was a really amazing kind of collaboration. But right now, today, almost 25 years later, you can
I think you had a frozen screen right in the middle of of this, and I believe that what, and hopefully she will get that back. But what Celeste was saying is that her beers are in supermarkets and the like, and there's still this issue of resources or a need for resources in order to uh, be able to compete, the distribution and the like, and also the support. What uh, is the nature? And I'm kind of doing the Sandman dancing until we get her back on. She has a new book that will be actually released, I believe, in August, with recipes of using different types of beers to enhance food, which is something that has been done in many different cultures, obviously. But this is something that I thought was important uh, for people to be aware of, because we have to support each other. That's when Celeste was talking about her start, Sylvia's, Melba's. These were African American restaurants that gave her an opportunity, and and that's, I guess, what I was saying from the beginning of our show as relates to the interview with Dr. Darity. Um, it's almost hard to imagine what could have happened if the resources that we're talking about that's due had been given. I understand that there is a concern as it relates to whites inferiority superiority complex thing going on. But hey, are you back? I was dancing.
I am back, and I want to apologize, everyone. The heat is so intense here that my device that I'm using overheated. So I literally have an ice pack on the back of the phone to cool it down. So I apologize for that.
That's quite all right. I mean, this is a business, and I apologize if it's heated inside. What's the temperature outside, Celeste?
I don't want to know, but it's pretty hot. I'm sitting in the old tobacco warehouse with a hot tin roof, so uh, it gets pretty
Well,
hot in here. So I'm so sorry. I can pick up
no,
where you.
don't apologize. I have a great deal of gratitude for you to go through all of this. What I wanted to do, you left off as relates to after you started doing sampling, you started moving the product and the distribution issues that took place. Where are you now with that?
Yeah, so we do still sell in the stores. We're at the Whole Foods, 125th, throughout the city. All the Whole Foods, various bars and restaurants, Melva's, Boulevard Bistro, Sylvia's Restaurant, a number of other places. I don't always remember all the names. We also distribute in Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. We're brewing in the UK. We've sold in Japan. So we've skipped around to a lot of amazing places that love Harlem. They love the history, they love the culture, and as Lloyd Williams always says, the Harlems of the world are right here in Rocky Mountain, all over the South, because so many people from our various families migrated up there, and now there's doing a little bit of reverse migration. So we're pretty much throughout the South, and we're launching a project in the UK in July. So wherever people love us and understand our history and culture, a lot of support has come from our communities in so many places, and I'm truly thankful for that.
Now, give the name of your beer. I mean, I know, but some people are looking, and I'm sure someone is saying, "What's the name of the beer?" Where give
Well,
the
we launched our flagship beer, which is the Harlem Sugar Hill Golden Ale. That was the beer we launched at the Studio Museum. I've been making several other beers. We have our Harlem Renaissance Wit beer, which celebrates more than 100 years, as you know, of the Harlem Renaissance, which is being profiled at the museum down there. We have our Harlem 125th Street IPA, which celebrates more than 200 years of history of this amazing cultural corridor that we all know very well. We've also recently done a beer called the Fugitive Brewer, which profiles Whoopi Goldberg, but more importantly, the story of Patsy Young, an enslaved brewer from right down the road here. We also have a Thunder Twins, which celebrates the lifetime of Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard, two of the greatest baseball players. So we have some core beers that we sell all the time. And then we have collaboration beers such as the Thunder Twins beer for Negro League Baseball and the Fugitive Brewer celebrating the life of Patsy Young. So we like to delve into a lot of the history and use our cans as an opportunity to celebrate our legacies, our cultures, to connect people, to collaborate, and just make sure our history isn't forgotten, because God knows with them taking it out of the schools, we need all the platforms we possibly can to remind people. And if you can do it with a refreshing sip of a good beer, well, why not?
and your cookbook. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Cookbook. Wow. I love cooking with beer and wine and a lot of different types of beverages. And the cookbook, it does feature Norma Darden's from Spoonbread's beer battered catfish. I grew up eating croaker fish here in the Carolinas, so we got beer battered croaker fish. We have beer smack and cheese, macaroni with beer. We have a stout cake. We have beer cocktails. It's not too much we don't put beer in, but this is by no means any indication that soul food is good just the way it is. We're just adding another little layer to it to enhance those already amazing flavors. So these are about 80 recipes that anyone can cook. There's recipes that are vegetarian. There are recipes that have, every type of meat, poultry, fish in it. So it's a variety of fun recipes that were really inspired by Southern food. All the stuff that my aunts and uncles and everybody else that I know cooked that were very nourishing, that were farm to table, that were just really great to eat growing up. So I'm excited to finally get this book out. It's been quite a labor of love. My son, who lives in Harlem, Corey, was very involved with helping me test the recipes, and I'm looking forward to sharing with everybody and getting in the
So
kitchen.
tell us the name and when it will start to be distributed and how.
Yes, the name, that's important. The name of the book is Harlem Brew Soul. Harlem, talking about almost 30 years of my inspiration living there. Brew, talking about the history of beer from Africa to America. Soul, talking about soul food and all the amazing dishes that we learned so much about growing up in the South. And the book will be released officially on September the 10th. I think the books will be in New York sometime in August. I just got my first book signing at Sisters Bookstore.
On
Spoke with
150 what
Jennifer yesterday,
156th
so
Street, right?
looking forward to that.
And speaking of Africa, we have to start, since we are talking about developing relationships, especially in Senegal and in Ghana, we have to start talking about some distribution in the mother country, since a lot of the history that I've learned from you is the full circle.
It certainly is. I have a dear friend in South Africa, Apaway, who makes beers based on traditional African ingredients there. She and I are working on a collaboration. But all over the continent, they're home brewers. They've been doing this for a long time, much longer than the history that exists here in America. So I do look forward to having a chance to share some of those recipes, do some collaborations throughout Africa, all over the continent. It's such a rich history. And all down 116th Street, there's so many ingredients that I could just walk into the store as I did and pick them up and just toss them right into the beer and do all types of wonderful things in terms of flavors. But, beer historically was very healing. It was great for hydration. It was great for medicinal purposes. We do get a buzz these days with beer, but that's not the only story about beer is all the wonderful stuff you feel. But that is sometimes pretty healing. I don't want to preach that, or pitch that, but there are other things that have happened with this amazing elixir thousands of years. So we can talk about that on the next show, perhaps.
And we're going to do that once it opens. That's a promise. We'll have you back. How can people reach you at this particular point if they want more information, or if they want to get more information as to can they purchasing and the like?
Yes, so the book is definitely on Amazon. If you put in Harlem Brew Soul, it should pop right up. They're pre-orders right now. We will be doing the book signing at Sisters Bookstore uptown sometime in September. I can be reached on Instagram at Harlem Brewery, also at Harlem Brew South. We have a project here in North Carolina. Those are probably the best ways to reach me. Email-wise, harlembrew@gmail.com. That's an email that I check very regularly. We'd love to hear from you. If there's any opportunities to collaborate or do tastings or just have a conversation about beer, I'm always open to that.
Well, we definitely need to have you on to promote the event at Sisters, which is a wonderful place to have a book signing. Actually, myself and a number of other colleagues have used Sisters as a place where we introduced our books. So there's some legacy there. Thank you so much, my dear, for having the time to go into this heated place to do this interview. I appreciate that. I'm sure that, hopefully you have some cold ones in the refrigerator that you might be able
Yeah,
to drink after you finish. But
I got a
thanks
Coke right.
again.
Getting ready to sip it. I look forward to sharing one with you when I see you soon.
I look forward to it too, but I have to look at Whole Foods. Trader Joe's is coming to 125th Street. You need to talk about getting
Yeah,
into Trader
might want
Joe's.
to ask for it. We've certainly been after them, but haven't broken through yet. But would definitely love
Yes.
to be there, and appreciate your support so much.
So we have to talk about that. But nevertheless, Celeste, really keep it out. Keep the brewing going. You know.
Let's brewing together. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be on Urbanology, and also to meet the prior guest. That was an amazing.
Dr. William Darity.
Yes.
And one of these days we have to have a corn liquor conversation.
I got some friends for you down here. So.
I'm sure you do. Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right. And again, that's the show for today. I appreciate you tuning in to Urbanology, the Art of War. There will be some updates coming up pretty soon because we're getting ready to go into Harlem Week, and there are a number of other things. For those who are in the city, please make note or save the date for July the 27th. The Comedy Club in Harlem has moved to St. Nicholas Avenue and 157th Street, I believe. But I'll make sure that I get that corrected for the next show. But we're supporting Nikki and Jamie on the 27th of July to bring as many people to the new place as possible. So if you are close to New York and want to find out about that, go to goharlem.org. That's the Harlem Tourism Board site, and they'll start to update you. But again, thanks to Urbanology Systems, Matt and Jasmine and everybody for giving us the opportunity to be here today. And hopefully, God willing, we'll see you next week. Bye.
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.